The clock on the wall read 2:13 a.m. Isabella leaned heavily against the counter, her hand pressing into the cool surface as another wave of pain tore through her body. She gritted her teeth, willing herself to stay upright. Her daughter, Sophia, clung to her leg, eyes wide with fear. "Mommy, what's happening?" Sophia's voice trembled, her small fingers tightening their grip. Isabella forced a smile, though the sharp contractions made it hard to breathe. "It's okay, sweetheart. Mommy just needs to call someone." Her phone sat on the table, the screen cracked from a fall earlier that week. With trembling fingers, she dialed 911. Each ring felt like an eternity. "Emergency services, what is your location?" "Please, I'm in labor. I'm home alone with my daughter. I need an ambulance," she gasped. The dispatcher's calm voice flowed through the speaker, grounding her for a moment. "Stay with me. Help is on the way. Can you describe your condition? How far apart are the contractions?" "5 minutes," she managed to say through clenched teeth. "I'm 9 months along. My husband, he isn't here." Silence lingered on the other end for a breath too long. "I understand. Can you unlock your front door?" Isabella nodded, forgetting the dispatcher couldn't see her. She guided Sophia toward the door, pausing every few steps as another contraction seized her. Sophia looked up, tears pooling in her eyes. "Why isn't Daddy here?" Isabella swallowed the lump in her throat. "He had to go away for a little while, baby." But the truth weighed heavily on her heart. Gabriel had chosen to leave. As Isabella unlocked the door and sat on the edge of the couch, the distant sound of sirens finally reached her ears. Relief washed over her, though it did little to soften the bitterness simmering beneath the surface. She had endured the last months of her pregnancy alone, and now, as she brought her child into the world, she felt more alone than ever. The sirens grew louder until red and blue lights danced across the living room walls. The paramedics rushed inside, gently moving Sophia aside. Isabella gripped the edge of the cushion, fighting the tears threatening to spill. "It's going to be okay, Mommy," Sophia whispered, her small hand resting on Isabella's. And in that moment, Isabella knew that no matter what happened next, she wasn't alone. Not entirely. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the family dining room, illuminating the perfectly set table. Isabella sat quietly, sipping her tea as Marta and Vanessa exchanged glances across from her. The tension in the room was palpable. Gabriel sat at the head of the table, scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the undercurrents of disapproval radiating from his mother and sister. "I've finally set the date," Vanessa announced, breaking the silence with a satisfied smile. "June 15th, a private estate in Edinburgh. Very exclusive." Isabella lifted her gaze. "Scotland, that's quite far. Congratulations, Vanessa." Vanessa's smile thinned. "Yes, it is. It'll be a family event, of course." Her eyes flickered toward Gabriel as if to emphasize the word family. "Hello guys, if you like our stories and haven't subscribed yet, support our work and subscribe to the channel to help." Isabella felt the sting of exclusion immediately, but she kept her expression calm. Marta leaned forward, placing her hand gently over Vanessa's. "We'll need everything to be perfect. And Isabella, dear, I assume you wouldn't mind helping with the desserts for the rehearsal dinner." Isabella blinked. "The desserts?" "Yes," Marta said smoothly. "You have such a talent for baking. It would be nice to contribute something personal to the evening. You'll be at home anyway." A polite rejection danced on the tip of Isabella's tongue, but Gabriel spoke first. "She'll handle it," he said casually, not even looking up from his phone. "Isabella loves baking." Isabella's grip on her teacup tightened. She glanced at Gabriel, searching his face for any hint of awareness, but found none. The conversation shifted to seating arrangements and flower choices, but Isabella no longer heard it. Her mind reeled from the quiet dismissal. Later that night, as she stood in the kitchen washing dishes, Gabriel wrapped his arms around her waist. "Vanessa's wedding is important to them," he said softly, sensing her mood. "It's just a cake. Don't take it personally." It's not just a cake, Gabriel," she replied, shaking off his touch. "It's about respect." Gabriel sighed, already tiring of the argument. "They're my family. I can't change how they are." "I know," Isabella whispered, staring out the window. "But I shouldn't have to keep enduring it." In the weeks that followed, Isabella prepared the desserts as requested, and on the night of the rehearsal dinner, as she arranged the delicate pastries on silver trays, she received a text from Vanessa. "Thank you for the desserts. There wasn't enough space at the table, so we didn't think you'd mind skipping tonight. Gabriel will bring back leftovers." Isabella stared at the screen, the words blurring as tears welled in her eyes. The sterile white walls of the hospital room seemed to hum with an unsettling quiet. Isabella cradled her newborn son in her arms, his tiny face peaceful and unaware of the storm swirling around them. Sophia sat on the edge of the chair beside the bed, swinging her legs as she stared curiously at her baby brother. Gabriel's absence felt like an open wound. Isabella had stopped checking her phone for messages. She already knew there wouldn't be any. A gentle knock at the door made her look up. A nurse entered with a clipboard, offering a warm smile. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Carvalho?" "Tired," Isabella replied truthfully, "but we're okay." The nurse made a few notes before pausing, glancing at the empty seat near the bed. "Will your husband be joining you soon?" Isabella hesitated. "He's away. Family event." The words tasted bitter. The nurse's smile softened with understanding, though she said nothing. Once she was alone again, Isabella traced her finger over the baby's delicate hand. "You're beautiful," she whispered, "and so strong already." Sophia leaned closer. "Mommy, what's his name?" Isabella brushed Sophia's hair back, planting a soft kiss on her forehead. "His name is Lucas." The girl's eyes brightened. "I like that name." Isabella smiled, but the weight pressing on her chest didn't lift. As much as she tried to focus on her children, the ache of Gabriel's absence grew louder with each passing minute. Later that evening, as Sophia drifted to sleep on the hospital cot, Isabella stared out the window at the dark sky. Her phone vibrated on the table. "Gabriel, Vanessa's wedding was beautiful. I'll call tomorrow." Isabella read the message, twice feeling the sharp cut of disappointment. No apology, no concern. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. 1,000 words swirled in her mind. Questions, accusations, demands. But in the end, she typed only 3 words. The sterile white walls of the hospital room seemed to hum with an unsettling quiet, broken only by the rhythmic beep of the monitors and the soft breathing of the newborn cradled in Isabella's arms. Lucas's tiny fingers curled around a strand of her hair, his face peaceful and unaware of the storm swirling around them. Sophia sat cross-legged on the hospital chair beside the bed, her chin resting in her hands as she gazed at her new baby. "Brother?" Her eyes, wide with curiosity, flickered between Isabella and the small bundle wrapped in a blue hospital blanket. "Can I hold him, Mummy?" she whispered, almost afraid to disturb the fragile silence that filled the room. Isabella smiled gently, shifting slightly to ease the dull ache in her lower back. "Not yet, sweetheart. He's still very little. Maybe tomorrow." Sophia nodded, though disappointment crept into her expression. Her small legs swung idly back and forth, the squeak of her sneakers on the linoleum floor filling the room. Isabella glanced toward the empty chair near the window, the chair where Gabriel should have been. But like every other moment in recent months, he was absent. She had stopped glancing at her phone for messages. Deep down, she already knew there wouldn't be any. Another contraction of bitterness twisted inside her, and she found herself gripping Lucas just a little tighter. A gentle knock at the door broke through the haze of her thoughts. Isabella looked up to see a nurse stepping inside, carrying a clipboard tucked under her arm. The woman offered a warm, practiced smile, her eyes flicking briefly to the newborn. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Carvalho?" the nurse asked softly, approaching the bed with careful steps. "Tired," Isabella admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But we're okay." The nurse nodded, scribbling notes on her clipboard before glancing around the room. Her gaze lingered on the empty chair beside the bed. "Will your husband be joining you soon?" she asked delicately, the edges of her voice laced with sympathy. Isabella hesitated for a long moment. The nurse's eyes met hers, and there was no judgment, only quiet understanding. "He's away. Family event," Isabella finally answered, though the words felt dry and sour on her tongue. The nurse offered a small nod, as if she had heard this answer many times before. "Well, you're doing great. I'll be nearby if you need anything." When the door closed behind her, the silence returned, heavier than before. Isabella shifted Lucas gently in her arms, pressing her lips to the soft down of his head. He smelled faintly of baby powder and something uniquely his own, a scent she already knew she would cherish. "You're beautiful," she whispered, "and so strong already." Sophia, still watching closely, leaned forward in her chair. "Mommy, what's his name?" Isabella smiled faintly, brushing Sophia's hair back from her face. "His name is Lucas." Sophia beamed, wriggling with excitement. "I like that name." Isabella's heart warmed at her daughter's joy, but it wasn't enough to lift the weight pressing against her chest. Even as she held her children close, the emptiness left. By Gabriel's absence felt overwhelming. Night crept in slowly, shadows lengthening across the hospital floor. Sophia drifted into sleep on the small cot provided for overnight stays, her thumb tucked under her chin as she clutched a plush rabbit to her chest. Isabella sat upright, cradling Lucas in the dim light of the room, watching as the city lights flickered beyond the hospital window. Her phone vibrated softly on the side table, startling her out of her thoughts. She hesitated before picking it up. "Gabriel, Vanessa's wedding was beautiful. I'll call tomorrow." The message stared back at her, unfeeling and detached, as though he had forgotten what had happened just hours ago. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the birth of their son. Isabella's fingers hovered over the keyboard, 1,000 thoughts swirling in her mind. Questions, accusations, anger, each one sharper than the last. She wanted to scream through the screen to ask him how he could abandon them so easily. Instead, after a long breath, she typed only 3 words. "Don't bother calling. The I." Message sent with a quiet ping. Isabella placed the phone back on the table and exhaled slowly, sinking deeper into the hospital bed. Her eyes drifted toward Sophia and then back to Lucas. For the first time in months, something shifted inside her, a realization that felt like the cracking of ice beneath the weight of a heavy winter. Gabriel's absence no longer felt like a temporary disappointment. It felt permanent. And as painful as that was, Isabella began to accept it. Holding Lucas a little closer, she whispered softly, "We'll be just fine." The kitchen was filled with the sweet aroma of chocolate and vanilla. Isabella stood at the marble counter, carefully piping cream onto delicate pastries. The late afternoon sun streamed through the window, painting the room in warm hues of orange and gold. Despite the tranquil atmosphere, her hands trembled slightly as she placed the finished desserts onto silver trays. It wasn't the baking that made her uneasy. It was everything the desserts represented. Gabriel entered the kitchen, loosening his tie as he leaned against the doorway, watching her. "You've been at this all day," he said casually, his eyes flicking to the dozens of pastries lined up neatly. "They look perfect. Vanessa will love them." Isabella didn't look up. "I'm sure she will." There was an edge to her, a voice that Gabriel either didn't notice or chose to ignore. He walked over and picked up one of the pastries, biting into it with a satisfied hum. "You always outdo yourself," he said between bites. "I don't know why you stress so much." Isabella wiped her hands on a kitchen towel, finally meeting his gaze. "Because it's the only thing I'm allowed to contribute to this wedding." Gabriel's brow furrowed. "Isabella." She held up a hand to stop him. "Don't. I know how this works. I make desserts, I smile politely, and I stay out of the way." Gabriel sighed, setting the half-eaten pastry back on the counter. "You're reading too much into this. My mother and Vanessa are just particular. It's nothing personal." "It feels personal," Isabella replied quietly, folding her arms across her chest. The silence stretched between them, heavy and unyielding. Gabriel finally crossed the kitchen, resting his hands on her shoulders. "Look, it's just one night. You don't have to come if you don't want to." The words felt like a slap. Isabella stepped back, breaking his hold. "I wasn't invited, Gabriel," she said, her voice trembling. "Did you even notice that? Your sister and your mother planned this entire event and I'm not on the guest list. I'm baking the desserts, but I won't even be there to see them served. Gabriel's lips parted, but no words came out. I see it now, Isabella continued, bitterness lacing her tone. I'm good enough to cook, clean, and play the role of the supportive wife. But when it comes to being part of this family, really, part of it, I'm invisible. Gabriel rubbed the back of his neck, glancing away. It's not like that. You're overthinking things. Isabella felt the heat rise in her chest. Am I? Because this isn't the first time. Your mother and sister have made it clear since the day we married that I don't belong, and you've let it happen. I can't control them, Gabriel muttered. No, Isabella said firmly, but you could stand up for me. You just choose not to. The words hung in the air, raw and painful. Gabriel exhaled sharply, avoiding her gaze as he walked toward the living room. I'm going to take a shower. We can talk about this later. But they didn't. Later that evening, Isabella carefully packed the trays of desserts into insulated boxes. She set them by the door, where Gabriel would pick them up before heading to the rehearsal dinner. As she wiped down the counters, her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen. Vanessa. Thank you for the desserts. There wasn't enough space at the table, so we didn't think you'd mind skipping tonight. Gabriel will bring back leftovers. Isabella stared at the message, the words cutting deeper than she expected. Gabriel emerged from the hallway moments later, dressed sharply in a navy suit. He smiled briefly as he grabbed his car keys. I'll be back by midnight. Isabella held up her phone. Did you know about this? Gabriel glanced at the screen, his expression unreadable. Vanessa mentioned something earlier. I didn't think it was a big deal. Her grip on the phone tightened. It's a big deal to me. Gabriel leaned in to kiss her cheek, but she stepped back, shaking her head. Go, she whispered. He hesitated, but eventually left without another word. As the door closed behind him, Isabella sank into one of the kitchen chairs, the quiet hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. She stared at the trays of desserts that had suddenly become symbols of her exclusion. For the first time, she allowed herself to cry. But by the time Gabriel returned that night, the tears had dried. The house felt colder than usual, even though the soft hum of the heater filled the silence. Isabella sat in the living room, cradling Lucas as he nursed quietly. The flickering light from the fireplace cast long shadows across the room, while Sophia lay on the carpet nearby, coloring in her sketchbook. Gabriel's absence was palpable. He hadn't returned from the wedding in Scotland. Days had passed since Vanessa's celebration, and aside from a few indifferent text messages, there had been no attempt to call, no effort to check in on his newborn son. Isabella shifted in her chair, gently rocking Lucas as her gaze drifted toward the packed suitcase by the door. It had been sitting there since she came home from the hospital, a silent declaration of everything left unsaid. The weight of Gabriel's neglect pressed down on her. "Mummy," Sophia's voice broke. The quiet. She looked up from her drawings, tilting her head curiously. "Is Daddy coming home soon?" Isabella hesitated, her heart aching at the innocence in her daughter's question. She brushed a strand of hair from Sophia's forehead and forced a smile. "I'm not sure, sweetheart," she replied softly, "but we're going to be okay. I promise." Sophia seemed content with the answer, returning to her drawings, but Isabella wasn't. Later that evening, after putting the children to bed, Isabella stood alone in the kitchen, washing bottles under the soft glow of the pendant lights. Each bubble swirling in the sink felt like a reminder of the life she had been left to manage alone. Her phone vibrated on the counter. She dried her hands and picked it up. "Gabriel, I'll be home this weekend. Hope everything is fine." A hollow laugh escaped her lips. "Fine." She stared at the message for a long time, rereading the words until they blurred together. The same indifference, the same avoidance of responsibility. Isabella set the phone down and gripped the edge of the sink, her knuckles turning white. She couldn't do this anymore. That night, after the house had gone still, she sat at the dining table with a pen and a blank sheet of paper. The glow of the lamp illuminated her determined face, as she began drafting a letter, one that outlined every instance of neglect, every absence, and every choice Gabriel had made to prioritize his family over hers. Each word felt like a small release, peeling away the weight she had carried for too long. By the time she finished, the paper trembled in her hands. She wasn't angry. She was resolute. The next morning, Isabella met with a lawyer. Sophia sat in the corner of the office playing with her toys, while Lucas slept peacefully in his carrier. Isabella listened intently as the lawyer explained the process. "You have a strong case," the woman said, folding her hands on the desk. "The abandonment during labor alone speaks volumes. We can proceed with filing for full custody if that's your wish." Isabella glanced at Sophia and Lucas, her heart tightening. She nodded. "I want full custody. I don't want him making decisions about our lives anymore." The lawyer's gaze softened. "I understand." As Isabella signed the first set of papers, she felt something shift, a quiet strength she hadn't realized she possessed. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Gabriel finally returned home. The sound of his keys jingling at the door made Isabella's heart race, but she remained seated on the couch nursing Lucas. Sophia jumped up excitedly, running to greet him. "Daddy!" she cried, wrapping her arms around his waist. Gabriel smiled, lifting her into his arms. His eyes flicked to Isabella, but the warmth in his gaze faltered when he saw the stack of papers resting on the coffee table. "What's this?" he asked, setting Sophia down. Isabella met his gaze calmly. "It's a petition for divorce." Gabriel froze as if the words had knocked the air from his lungs. "Isabella, wait, can we—" "No," she interrupted, her voice steady. "I've waited long enough, Gabriel. I needed you. Our children needed you. And you chose them. Marta. Vanessa, everyone but us." Gabriel's eyes darted between her and the sleeping baby in her arms. "I thought we were fine," he whispered. Isabella's expression hardened. "That's the problem. You thought neglect was normal. I won't raise our children in that environment." Gabriel took a step closer, but she shook her head. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," she said, her tone final. "I'm filing for full custody." The weight of her words hung heavily in the air. Gabriel opened his mouth to protest, but found no argument to offer. For the first time, he looked genuinely afraid. Isabella rose from the couch, pressing a kiss to Lucas's forehead before placing him gently in his crib. She then knelt by Sophia, tucking her hair behind her ear. Gabriel watched in silence as she guided their daughter to bed, realizing that the life he had taken for granted was slipping away, one step at a time. The soft clinking of silverware echoed in the grand dining room of Marta's house. The long oak table was draped with an elegant cream tablecloth, accented by golden candlesticks and floral arrangements that seemed almost too extravagant for a simple family dinner. Isabella sat near the end of the table, her hands resting quietly on her lap, while Marta and Vanessa dominated the conversation. Gabriel sat beside her, his gaze focused on his plate, as if it were the most interesting thing in the room. "I heard Vanessa got another promotion," Marta announced proudly, casting a glance toward her daughter. "It's no surprise. She's always been driven." Vanessa flashed a smug smile. "I suppose they recognize talent when they see it." Isabella took a sip of her water, resisting the urge to roll her eyes. This was a familiar routine, a performance she had witnessed countless times before. The endless praise for Vanessa, the quiet dismissal of anything Isabella contributed. "And how is that bakery project of yours going, Isabella?" Marta's voice cut through the air, laced with subtle condescension. Isabella lowered her glass. "It's going well. I've secured a few clients for wedding cakes next season." Marta raised an eyebrow. "Oh, that's charming. Though I imagine it must be exhausting balancing that with motherhood." Vanessa smirked, swirling the wine in her glass. "Well, not everyone can manage their time like I do." The tension was thick enough to slice through. Gabriel shifted, in his seat, offering Isabella a faint apologetic smile, but he said nothing. It was always like this. After dinner, as Marta and Vanessa retreated to the sitting room, Isabella lingered in the kitchen, washing dishes. The sound of laughter drifted, From the other room, each laugh tugging at a wound that had long since scarred over, Gabriel entered quietly, drying a dish as he stood beside her. "They mean well," he said softly, placing a clean plate on the rack. Isabella's hands stilled in the soapy water. "Do they?" Gabriel sighed, setting the towel down. "Look, they just have high expectations. You know how my mother is. It's not personal." Isabella turned to face him, searching his expression for any trace of understanding. "It feels personal, Gabriel. Every time I come here, I feel like I'm auditioning for a role I'll never get." His shoulders sagged under the weight of the words he couldn't deny. "I know it's hard, but—" "No," she interrupted, drying her hands. "You don't know. You stand by and let it happen. You never defend me. You act like their words don't matter, but they do." Gabriel opened his mouth to respond, but the sound of Marta's voice calling his name from the other room stopped. Him. He hesitated, torn between two worlds. Then, with a quiet sigh, he left to join his mother and sister. Isabella stood alone in the kitchen, the warmth of the water fading as she clenched the edge of the sink. Weeks later, the pattern repeated itself. Marta invited the family to a garden party to celebrate Vanessa's engagement. Isabella, heavily pregnant with Lucas at the time, spent the afternoon chasing after Sophia, while Gabriel entertained guests. Alongside Vanessa, Isabella sat on a bench near the rose bushes, pressing a hand to her lower back. Sophia tugged at her hand, eager to join the other children playing by the fountain. "Go ahead, sweetheart. I'll be right here," Isabella assured her, watching as Sophia skipped across the lawn. Marta appeared beside her, arms crossed as she surveyed the party. "You look tired, Isabella," she remarked. "I'm fine," Isabella replied, forcing a polite smile. Marta's gaze lingered on Sophia. You know, raising children is demanding. Perhaps you should focus more on that instead of all this baking nonsense. Gabriel has a good job. You don't need to work." Isabella's smile faded. "I enjoy my work, Marta." Marta chuckled, lightly. "Enjoy it while you can. Once Lucas arrives, you won't have time for hobbies." Before Isabella could respond, Vanessa joined them, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "Mum's right. You're lucky Gabriel is patient with all your little side projects. Not every husband would be." The words hung in the air, a thinly veiled jab that left Isabella speechless. Gabriel approached a moment later, oblivious to the tension. He pressed a kiss to Isabella's forehead, grinning. "Everything okay here?" Isabella swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded. "Yes, perfect." That night, as they drove home, Isabella stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past. Gabriel's hand rested on the steering wheel, his attention fixed on the road. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered suddenly. Gabriel glanced at her. "Doing what?" "Pretending everything is fine. Letting your mother and sister treat me like I don't belong. I need you to stand by me, Gabriel, not just in private, out there in front of them." He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched until they pulled into the driveway. Gabriel killed the engine and turned to her. "I'll talk to them," he promised softly, but the promise felt hollow. Isabella nodded, though deep down she already knew. He wouldn't. The courtroom was quiet, save for the soft rustle of papers and the distant hum of conversation beyond the heavy oak doors. Isabella sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded neatly in her lap as she waited for the proceedings to begin. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, illuminating the worn surface of the table where she rested her palms. Her lawyer, Ana Ribeiro, sat beside her, calmly reviewing documents with a poised efficiency that made Isabella feel anchored. Across the room, Gabriel sat with his own legal counsel. His posture was stiff, his eyes fixed on the floor, unable to meet Isabella's gaze. He had barely looked at her since the divorce papers were filed. "Are you ready for this?" Anna asked softly, sensing Isabella's nervous energy. Isabella drew in a breath and nodded. "I've never been more ready." The past few months had been transformative. The initial shock of separation had given way to something stronger, resolve. Gabriel's absence during Lucas's birth had been the final straw, but it wasn't the only betrayal she carried. Years of neglect, exclusion, and silence had built the foundation of her decision. Now, she was here to ensure that she and her children would no longer live in the shadow of someone else's indifference. As the judge entered the courtroom, everyone rose. Isabella's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her gaze forward, steady and unyielding. The proceedings moved quickly. Gabriel's lawyer made his arguments, but the evidence spoke for itself. Records of Gabriel's absence during the birth, statements from witnesses, and messages that painted a clear picture of neglect all built the case Anna had meticulously crafted. When Isabella took the stand, her voice remained calm, even as she recounted the night Lucas was born. "I was alone with my daughter," she explained, her gaze fixed on the judge. "I went into labor at home, with no one to help me except my 5-year-old. Gabriel chose to attend his sister's wedding in another country, rather than be there for the birth of our child." Her voice didn't waver. "I don't believe that was the action of a man who prioritizes his family," she continued, "and I cannot allow that pattern to continue." Gabriel shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but Isabella didn't look at him. When the judge ruled in her favor, granting full custody of both children, Isabella exhaled deeply, the weight lifting from her shoulders. Later that day, Isabella walked through the front door of her small but cozy home. Sophia was playing on the living room floor, drawing in her sketchbook, while Lucas napped in his bassinet nearby. The sight of them filled her with warmth. "Mommy!" Sophia ran up, wrapping her arms around Isabella's waist. "Did everything go okay?" Isabella knelt down, brushing her fingers gently through Sophia's hair. "Yes, sweetheart. Everything is just fine now." She meant it. In the weeks that followed the court decision, Isabella found herself rediscovering parts of her life she had long forgotten. With Gabriel's absence solidified, she began focusing on the bakery project that had once been a mere hobby. Late nights in the kitchen became moments of inspiration rather than exhaustion, as she poured her heart into crafting elaborate cakes and pastries. Word spread quickly. By the end of the month, she had secured enough orders to consider expanding beyond her small home kitchen. One afternoon, as she arranged cupcakes in the display case of a rented shop space, Anna stopped by for a visit. "This place looks incredible," Anna said, admiring the light pastel decor and the rows of neatly decorated pastries. "You've come a long way in just a few months." Isabella smiled, dusting powdered sugar over a tray of tarts. "I didn't think I'd ever get here, to be honest. But I guess sometimes hitting rock bottom is the best place to rebuild." Anna crossed, her arms leaning against the counter. "You deserve this, Isabella. After everything you chose to rise above it, that's not easy." Isabella glanced toward the corner of the shop, where Sophia sat reading, occasionally sneaking bites of a chocolate croissant. Lucas giggled in his stroller nearby. "I had no choice," Isabella said, her voice soft but resolute. "For them, I had to." Vanessa's downfall came quietly, almost poetically. The businessman she had married discovered the web of lies she had spun about her wealth and connections. Rumors of financial instability circulated, and within weeks, Vanessa's lavish lifestyle began to crumble. Isabella heard through acquaintances that Vanessa's marriage ended abruptly, leaving her back at Marta's house, the grand engagement ring gone from her finger. Marta, too, grew distant from Gabriel after the divorce. The fractures in their family deepened, but Isabella felt no satisfaction in their unraveling. Her focus remained on moving forward, not looking back. One evening, as Isabella locked up the bakery after closing, Gabriel appeared outside, waiting beside his car. She hesitated for a moment before stepping outside. "I heard about Vanessa," he said quietly, shoving his hands into his pockets. Isabella nodded. "I'm sorry things turned out that way." Gabriel glanced down, the faintest hint of regret in his eyes. "I'm sorry for how I treated you, Isabella. I should have been there for you, for the kids." Isabella met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "It's too late for that now, Gabriel, but I appreciate the apology." They stood in silence for a moment before Gabriel nodded, stepping away. "Take care of them," he said, glancing toward the window where Sophia's drawings decorated the glass. "I always have," Isabella replied softly. As Gabriel's car disappeared down the street, Isabella turned back toward the bakery. The sign on the door read, Cavallo's Confections, Este 2025. It was more than just a bakery. It was a testament to everything she had survived and everything she had become. The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains of Isabella's new bakery, casting a soft glow over the neatly arranged pastries in the glass display case. The rich scent of fresh bread and chocolate filled the air, wrapping the small shop in warmth and comfort. The faint hum of life outside the door, people heading to work, children laughing on their way to school, felt like a reminder of how far she had come. Isabella moved quietly behind the counter, arranging the final touches on a three-tiered cake for a wedding order. The design was delicate, with pale pink flowers and gold leaf accents, each detail reflecting the care and attention she poured into her craft. Sophia sat by the window, sketching flowers and cupcakes in her notebook, while Lucas napped soundly in a portable crib tucked in the corner of the bakery. The sight of her children, peaceful, happy, filled Isabella with a quiet pride she hadn't known she needed. The bell above the door chimed, and Anna stepped inside holding a small potted plant wrapped with a blue ribbon. "Another masterpiece, I see," Anna said, nodding toward the wedding cake. "You've outdone yourself, Isabella." Isabella smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "It's for a couple getting married next week. They said they wanted something elegant but simple." Anna set the plant on the counter. "Well, I thought this place could use a bit more greenery. Consider it a housewarming gift." Isabella laughed softly, touching the leaves of the plant. "Thank you. It's perfect." Anna's gaze drifted to the photographs pinned on the bakery's bulletin board, pictures of Sophia's birthday party, Lucas's first steps, and snapshots of Isabella at local markets, selling pastries with a proud smile. "You've built something really beautiful here," Anna said, her tone gentle. "It's not just the bakery, your life. You should be proud." Isabella followed Anna's gaze, her chest tightening slightly. "There were days I didn't think I'd make it this far," she admitted. "But somehow, I did." Anna leaned against the counter. "And Gabriel? Has he been around much since the court ruling?" Isabella shook her head, but there was no bitterness in her voice. "No, he visits Sophia and Lucas occasionally, but it's different now. I think he finally realized what he lost. I hope for their sake that he stays present." Anna studied Isabella for a moment, as if searching for any trace of lingering pain. "And you? Do you regret anything?" Isabella's gaze drifted to her children, the warmth of the bakery surrounding them like a protective cocoon. She thought back to the years of compromise, the quiet moments when she had felt invisible, and the night she had gone into labor, alone. "No," Isabella said softly, shaking her head. "I don't regret leaving. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was necessary. For me. For them." Anna smiled, satisfied with the answer. That evening, after closing the bakery, Isabella walked hand in hand with Sophia, pushing Lucas's stroller as they made their way through the quiet neighborhood. The streets were lined with trees whose branches swayed gently in the cool breeze. The lights from nearby cafes and small shops illuminated the path ahead, casting a warm glow over the cobblestone streets. "Mummy, can we stop at the park?" Sophia asked, tugging lightly on Isabella's hand. Isabella glanced at the time but relented, guiding them toward the park at the end of the street. As Sophia ran toward the swings, Isabella sat on a nearby bench, gently rocking the stroller as Lucas stirred but didn't wake. She watched Sophia laugh with other children, her heart swelling with quiet contentment. It wasn't the life she had imagined when she first married Gabriel. It wasn't the grand, picture-perfect family she had once hoped for, but it was enough. "Mind if I join you?" Isabella looked up to find Gabriel standing nearby, his hands in his coat pockets. He seemed hesitant, almost unsure of his place in this new version of their lives. She nodded, gesturing to the empty space on the bench. He sat down, watching Sophia play. "She's grown so much," Gabriel said, a faint trace of regret in his voice. "I feel like I missed so much of it." Isabella didn't respond immediately. She didn't want to dwell on the past or reopen old wounds. "You still have time," she finally said, her tone gentle but firm. Gabriel glanced at her, as if searching for resentment, but finding none. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for giving me that chance." Isabella nodded, but said nothing more. She knew their relationship had shifted irreversibly, but she no longer held the weight of anger or disappointment. As the sun began to set, she called Sophia over. They said goodbye to Gabriel, and as Isabella pushed Lucas's stroller down the path toward home, she felt lighter than she had in years. She wasn't defined by her past, nor by the people who had once made her feel small. She had built a new life, one crafted with love, resilience, and the unwavering bond she shared with her children. And as she crossed the threshold of their cozy home, the bakery sign glowing softly in the distance, Isabella knew she had found something far greater than she had ever lost. She had found herself. If you like our stories and haven't subscribed yet, support our work and subscribe to the channel to help you.